Good evening, y'all. Welcome to our Once Upon a Pastime series. I'm Mac McGee. I hope y'all are having a good night. We're going to do this pretty quickly. I know a lot of folks are going to be trying to jam out to watch the Indiana-Oregon game. I know some folks in Brave Country don't care as much about that as they did the game last night, but nonetheless, that's why we're starting this a little earlier than we normally do our shows. Normally these come on at 6 o'clock. The next one we do will be 6 o'clock. I believe it's next. Is it next Thursday, next Friday? I'd have to look at it. But anyways, what we're going to get into tonight is the Once Upon a Pastime series. We're going to talk about the GOATs you should know. And what we mean by that is there are players that have played this great game all throughout the history of Major League Baseball. And people tend to focus on the Babe Ruths, the modern day would be Shohei Ohtani, the people that they consider the all-time greats, the Lou Gehrigs, even if you want to go a little further back, the Ty Cobbs, the Honus Wagners. But today what we're going to talk about, because this game's been going on for well over the 150 years of professional baseball, organized baseball, you can go take it all the way back to about 1871 when the game really became an organized professional baseball league. The National Association, which is what the Braves started off in. They were the Boston Red Stockings. Then they moved over to the National League in 1876. A lot of folks who haven't done the research, they begin in 1876, but 1871 was really the beginning of it because it basically gave birth to the National League. And so what we're going to do is go through basically a lineup of players, and you may know the names, but you may not know enough about them. So we're going to give you a starting pitching staff. We're going to give you a couple of relievers. We're going to give you catchers, first, second, third, short. We're going to give you a full outfield. In fact, we're going to give you a couple of extra outfielders today. We're going to give you a couple of utilities just because these guys played really well in a couple of different positions, and I didn't want to leave them out. Now, we could do this, honestly. I could start this stream, and this could last for 16 days without taking a break, and we'd never get to the great players. So, obviously, players are going to be left out. But we tried to do basically one for each position, and then we gave you an extra reliever, and we gave you a couple of extra utilities. In a sense that you can call them the designators. I didn't put designated hitters in because, first of all, they didn't bring it till 1973. And then, of course, the designated hitter rule didn't hit the National League until COVID forced it in 2020, and they've kept it ever since. So, and honestly, I don't really look at the designated hitter is a true position anyways. That's just the National League fan in me, and it's because they don't play the field. It's not a true, honest position in Major League Baseball, so we left the DH out. And I feel like the big DHs, you've heard the names 100 times. The two big ones, if you're ever doing research on it, it's going to be Edgar Martinez and it's going to be Big Papi, and depending on whether or not you want to look at World Series rings, or you want to look at the fact that Edgar Martinez did it earnestly and there's a lot of cloud over Big Papi's steroid use, you can have that argument into the streets into the wee hours of the morning. But we're not going to do that today. We're going to do what I just laid out here. So let's go ahead and start into it, and we'll probably take a couple of breaks just so I can catch my breath and reset and whatnot. But we're going to start off with the most important position in all of baseball, and I'm not talking about the starting pitching. I'm talking about the man behind the plate, the catcher. And when you look at catchers and you look at all the big names that have played throughout the years, and obviously what the first names that jump out at you are the Johnny Benches, the Yogi Berras, the Carlton Fisks. If you want to put guys who have been clouded with steroids, you can put Pudge Rodriguez and Mike Piazza in there. And then you have some of the modern day ones like Joe Mauer. I don't want to leave out Gary Carter. He's one of the highest WARs in all of Major League Baseball history behind the plate. But a guy that doesn't get enough love, I don't believe, and it's strange because he played for one of the most iconic brands in all of baseball, is Bill Dickey. Bill Dickey was the hind catcher for the New York Yankees in what was considered basically their heyday. I mean, Bill Dickey was with the New York Yankees from 1928, so he was right there, just missing out on 1927 Murderers Row, which is one of the most famous lineups in all of the sports history. But he continued to be with the Yankees all the way until 1946, missing a couple of years, 44 and 45, because of World War II. Even though he was pretty long in the tooth at that point, how old was he at that point? 37, 38 years old. He still did 2 years in the military during World War II, starting in 1944. But his overall WAR itself was 56, and we'll compare that to the rest here in a second. But the other thing that jumps out at you with Bill Dickey is he had a lifetime batting average of .313 as a catcher. I mean, as a catcher in the 1930s, 1940s, 1920s. That's a hell of a batter. And, of course, he was the main man behind the plate before Yogi Berra came around, that was leading these great Yankee teams to championship wins. And Bill Dickey I still think he's one of the most underrated players in all of Major League Baseball, and definitely one of the most underrated catchers, because they just don't talk about him. And I think it's because the number one reason, I believe, is because when you win 7 World Series titles, right? And his first being in 1932, and then he won them from 36 to 39. That was when the Joe DiMaggio era started. He won it again in 41 and 43. But when you start talking about a guy who's an 11-time All-Stars, won 7 World Series titles, one of the reasons why he gets blended in, and you're like, well, why would he be overlooked? It's because he didn't have the huge offensive prowess of a Babe Ruth, a Lou Gehrig, a Joe DiMaggio, and he gets kind of taken for granted that, oh, well, anybody could have been behind the plate. The Yankees would have been great. That's not the case. I mean, I just told you a second ago, lifetime batting average of .313. He had 1,200 RBIs, and he was one of the main linchpins in that New York Yankee organization for a long, long time. So that's one of the first ones that I want to throw out there, is with the Bill Dickey, who gets overlooked, and I'll never understand why, because he has a higher WAR than some of the great names that you've heard of: Ted Simmons, Mickey Cochran, Buster Posey. If you're talking about a modern day catcher, most people would be banging the table saying Buster Posey's the best to do it in the last 20, 30 years, and they wouldn't be wrong. But he's got a higher WAR than Buster Posey. And one of the most difficult things about having a high WAR for a catcher is that the knees are going to start to take a toll on your offense, and it's going to affect your offensive WAR. And to have a long career behind the plate, you have to take care of your body, meaning staying in shape, but then also in the off season, lifting and whatnot, because your knees are going to constantly take a pounding. And then, of course, all the brutal foul balls and whatnot. And back in those days, the protective gear was nowhere near what it is today. And the guys who catch today still get beat up all to hell. But the point is, it's very, very difficult to get involved in being a major league catcher for a long period of time for a championship team and get your just due. Everybody always talks about Johnny Bench, Yogi Berra. That's the big argument. Who would you rather have? For my money, by the way, it's Yogi Berra, and it's not particularly close. Yogi Berra, he had the rings, and he was the one that led that great Yankee rotation, but I can't take anything away from Johnny Bench because Johnny Bench was on the Big Red Machine. Johnny Bench, his offensive numbers are a little more impressive, but if you look at it as a whole, they don't dwarf him the way you think they would. I mean, I think a lot of people forget Yogi Berra was as good as he was. He had an OPS of 830 over his career, and that's not nothing. And Johnny Bench's OPS is 817. Pretty darn good for a catcher, but obviously Yogi Berra's was higher. So that's always been my contention, that I would take Yogi Berra over Johnny Bench. But if you didn't watch either one of them play, or if you only grew up watching Johnny Bench, of course that's the guy you're going to take because that was your guy. That was the guy you grew up watching. It's very hard for someone to separate the two and say, well, I would take so-and-so over so-and-so because he was the better player, even though I didn't see him play. It's kind of the argument that kids today growing up are having in basketball of LeBron versus Michael Jordan. The ones that tell you that it's LeBron, they never saw Michael play. That doesn't mean that they're right. It's just their perspective at that time. And, of course, the same argument's going to come around for years about Shohei Ohtani versus Babe Ruth. What Babe Ruth did was it's so ridiculously it's at an angle right now where you look at what Babe Ruth did over his career. It's so absurd. It's almost comical. It's almost like a cartoon. Like, you almost believe it couldn't have happened the way that it did. Shohei Ohtani's has been very, very impressive, but remember, Shohei Ohtani has had the luxury of the designated hitter. So, but not taking anything away from Shohei because he's obviously as good as it gets nowadays. But that doesn't mean that I would take him over Babe Ruth. So that's our catcher, and we'll go to the next man on the list, the next position on the list. That's the first baseman. And the first base position, over the years, you get the big names because it is a position of power. It is a position that most people get very entrenched with their guy, whoever it is. And you see him quite a bit because he's always involved in the majority of the outs in a Major League Baseball game. If you're a Braves fan, you're very familiar with Matt Olson, or back when Freddie Freeman was here, because it's not just what they do at the plate and hitting the ball, but the fact that they are over there scooping up the throws on every single defensive ground out through a 162-game season. So you get to see him live and in person, and sometimes I think they get taken for granted. You look at how spoiled the Braves have been since Freddie Freeman first took over for Atlanta, so we're talking about well over 15 years ago, and they go from him to what is arguably a much better defensive and eventually a better offensive batter in Matt Olson. And we've been extremely, some people will call the word blessed, I will say extremely lucky, because it could have went a number of different ways when Freddie Freeman left to go to Los Angeles. But instead, we were lucky enough to get a Matt Olson and never miss a beat. And we didn't even have like that down one or two seasons where you're waiting for some prospect to come along. We just made the trade and away we go. And he'll be here for the foreseeable. What does he have, about 5 more years left on his contract? So, and I'm sure eventually he gets extended. We'll probably have Matt Olson for close to another 10 years at that first base spot. So people who grow up watching their guy, they are very dug in on, man, this is my guy. This is the best, or this is one of the best. Lou Gehrig obviously is going to come to mind, and Albert Pujols, Jimmy Fox, Jeff Bagwell, of course, he's always had that cloud over him as well. Frank Thomas, the big hurt, Jim Thome. I think he's one of the most underrated power hitters, and if I was putting designated hitters together, that would be a guy that I would put. Even though he was known at first base, he did transition to the DH role, and that guy hit like a donkey. And then you have some of the guys who didn't have quite the offensive prowess, but were still great in their own right, guys like Joey Votto. But the guy that I want to touch on today, because he was one of the great players of his day and ended up with a WAR of 78.7. And if you want it, or Okay, well, there's two different ones. This one's showing 79.8. But either way, he finished above Frank Thomas, above Jim Thome, Miguel Cabrera, Joey Votto, Willie McCovey, Todd Helton, who just recently went into the Hall of Fame as well. He's higher on the list than Eddie Murray, currently higher than Freddie Freeman, probably won't finish there. But he also played in the dead ball era. And he played a brief stint for, what was it, 4 or 5 seasons with the Boston National League team that is now your Atlanta Braves. They changed names a couple of times while he was there, but he was with the Boston Red Stockings and the Red Caps. And this guy, I don't think anybody ever talks about him, but his numbers are pretty darn impressive. His name is Dan Brothers. And Dan Brothers batted .342 lifetime. .342 lifetime from 1879 to 1896. So we're talking about darn near 20 years, right? One of the biggest things that jumps out at me, because we're talking about the dead ball era. We're talking about an era where they were playing with the same ball for the entire ball game. By the end of the game, it was a very heavy ball normally. It was usually something. It was a ball that had picked up a ton of debris. It was really hard to hit out of the infield. Even with that being said, listen to these guys' numbers. So he batted .342, and that played into it. But he had a slugging percentage of .520 and an on-base of .423 and an OPS of .943. You talk about OPS, and you talk about I've always said 800 is, to me, it's the level where you're a hell of a player. And if you do it lifetime, you're a damn good player, right? But the OPS is, to me, one of the biggest indicators, because it's telling you how often a guy is on base, and it's also telling you when he's on base, how did he get there, right? In other words, was it a single? Was it a double? Was it a triple? And Dan Brothers finishes with a lifetime OPS of .943. And if you're wondering, like, where does that sit him? That sits him almost, he's just below, but almost in a virtual tie with Ty Cobb. He sits above Willie Mays. And Willie Mays played in an era that the ball flew out of the stadium. He's even above Shoeless Joe Jackson, Hack Wilson. These are names of names. Talking about modern day players, he has a higher OPS than David Ortiz, Vladimir Guerrero, Chipper Jones, Carlos Delgado, the great Hank Aaron. His OPS, his lifetime OPS, was higher than all of these guys. And that's not nothing in my book. Dan Brothers played for Troy, Buffalo, Detroit, and then came over to the Boston Beaneaters, which is now the Atlanta Braves, in 1889. Stuck with that same franchise all the way through 1892, where he goes over to the Brooklyn Bridegrooms, which is now the Dodgers, and then makes his way to the Baltimore Orioles of the 1890s, mid-1890s, 94, 95, and part of 96. If you're wondering about the Baltimore Orioles of the 1890s, they were the powerhouse of the league. We've talked about them in the past, but they were the reason why you hear the term Baltimore chop. They perfected. They would slam the ball on the ground and beat the ball out on a single for a base hit. But this wasn't his game. He hit for a little more power. We're talking about bullets in the gap. We're talking about he did for an era where the ball did not leave the yard. He did have 107 home runs, which is quite a number in that day. And he scored 1,500 runs and over 100 home runs, and then his RBI total was 1,300. So Dan Brothers is a guy that I think a lot of people are not familiar with, but he was one of the best to ever do it, and he is our first baseman on the list. Our second baseman on the list is a guy by the name of Charlie Gehringer. And Charlie Gehringer played for the Detroit Tigers. In fact, he played for the Tigers his entire career. He's one of those rare guys that played all the way through for the same team. From 1924 to 1942, he was the second baseman for the Detroit Tigers, who won the World Series in 1935 and always had a good team during that era. He was a six-time All-Star. He was the American League MVP in 1937 and was the batting champion as well in 37. And he led the American League in stolen bases in 1929. His number is retired as well. But a lot of people don't talk about Charlie Gehringer, and he's from right outside of Detroit. He was born in Michigan, and Fowlerville is where he was born. So he was born in Fowlerville, played his entire career with the Detroit Tigers, and dies in Bloomfield Hill, Michigan. That's a Michigan man. You hear people talk about the Michigan man? That's a Michigan man. So with that being said, Charlie Gehringer is one of these guys. His lifetime batting average was 320. 320. And he finished with 2,800 hits, just below the 3,000 level, 1,400 RBIs. And he's a guy that a lot of folks won't talk about in the big picture. But if you remember, the Major League Baseball, or the National Baseball Hall of Fame, began in 1936. So it had only been 13 years since the Hall of Fame was introduced, which means it was extremely difficult to get into the Hall of Fame in those days, because you had all these all-time greats that they were all voting on that never had a chance to have a vote because the Hall didn't exist. And so that's why for years and years and years, when you would say, how in the world did it take so many years for guys to get in to the Hall of Fame back in the day? It was because it was being cluttered by guys who had played years before the votes were even taking place. So that's why they eventually came up with the rule of it's now 10. At one point it was 15, where you could only be on the ballot for so long so that they could clear it, so you would quit getting votes from guys. But with all that being said, a guy who you never hear talked about, he played until 1942. In just his third year of eligibility, he received 85% of the vote to get into the Hall of Fame. So the people of his time knew how damn good he was. You never hear Charlie Gehringer's name, and I think it's a damn shame. So Charlie Gehringer, I felt like definitely gets a nod today on the GOATs you ought to know. The next guy on the list, this guy, you do know his name, okay? But even with that being said, I don't think he gets talked about enough in the big picture, because he's almost become a caricature. Because if you're a Cubs fan, you are very familiar with the term "let's play two," and that was Ernie Banks. But no one ever talks about him on the all-time list of great players at his position. So Ernie Banks, as a shortstop, is extremely underrated. And you talk about a guy that, and I get it, there's different ways to come up with these different wars. That's why there's so many different war lists. You've got you got the normal war that you always hear about, wins above replacement. You got the War 7, the Jaws War, the War 162, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Ernie Banks only sits number 8 on the list. You could make the argument that Ernie Banks is as good as anybody that has ever played the game of shortstop. The only one I would definitely put in front of him is the great Honus Wagner. Honus Wagner played so long ago, people don't really understand how dominant he was at his position. Honus Wagner finished with a WAR of 131. That dwarfs anybody that didn't do steroids. Nobody has a WAR of 100 that didn't do steroids at the shortstop position. The next closest person to Honus Wagner on the WAR is Cal Ripken Jr., and one of the reasons is because, A, he was kind of a phenom for his time. You know, one of the things for WAR is the more games you play, you accrue the value of WAR, wins above replacement. So not only did he not miss a game for several years, but he also had a very long career. But his wins above replacement is at 95.9. Honus Wagner is 131. So you're talking about 36, almost 37 better than Cal Ripken Jr. And if you want to get an idea of what does that mean, it means that he was a complete Trey Turner above Cal Ripken Jr. Now, obviously, Turner will eventually get the numbers to where we're at. But give you someone who's actually completed his career. A Jose Reyes, who was a phenomenal shortstop at his own. What's another name that I saw earlier today? A Trevor Story. He was a complete Trevor Story, better than Cal Ripken Jr. So it's never fair to argue who the greatest shortstop of all time is, because it's Honus Wagner. It's not even close. But the next greatest shortstop to me, because he had a good glove, and the man hit 512 home runs, you've got to put the argument in there with Ernie Banks. He was a 14-time All-Star. He won the National League NL MVP back-to-back in 1958 and 1959. What he has always been hurt by was his entire career playing for a Chicago Cubs team from 1953 to 1971. He was on a team that never won a pennant. That wasn't Ernie Banks' fault. I mean the guy won a Gold Glove, 14-time All-Star, 512 home runs, 2,500 hits, 1,600 RBI, and yet all you ever hear about him is let's play two and his great personality. So I think he's one of the more underrated players of all time. The next guy that we're going to put on the list, the third baseman, before we transition over to the outfield, is an Atlanta Brave. He was a Milwaukee Brave. He was a Boston Brave. 12-time All-Star, 2-time World Series champion, a 2-time NL home run leader in 1953 and 1959. His number 41 is retired with the Atlanta Braves. It's the great Eddie Matthews. And anytime someone starts talking about putting together an all-time list of Atlanta Braves players and they put Chipper Jones over Eddie Matthews, they just don't know the game. It's not necessarily their fault. It's who they grew up watching. Most people don't realize how damn good Eddie Matthews was. Eddie Matthews finished with a WAR of 96. Eddie Matthews, the only third baseman in the history of Major League Baseball who has a greater number, not just WAR, but across the board, is Michael Jack Schmidt of the Philadelphia Phillies. That's it. That's the list. Chipper Jones is sixth on the list, so he's not anything to sneer at. Chipper Jones is just below George Brett. He's 3.3 below George Brett. But Eddie Matthews never seems to get a ton of all-time credit. You'll even hear, and that's why I didn't put him on our list if you're wondering. I didn't put Warren Spahn on our list because everybody seems to know Warren Spahn. Everybody seems to acknowledge how great Warren Spahn is. But no one, when they start talking, I'm telling you, I see it all the time. And these are people who are big baseball fans, right? They run baseball accounts. And they'll say, hey, this is my all-time Braves team. Eddie Matthews is always left off the list. They're always putting Chipper Jones out there at third. And I'm not taking anything away from Chipper Jones. Huge Chipper Jones fan. Loved watching Chipper play. Missed the hell out of watching Chipper Jones play. But Eddie Matthews is the greatest third baseman in the history of the Braves organization. And remember, he played for all three cities. All right, we're going to transition now to the outfield. We'll be back in a flash here on our Once Upon a Pastime series. Right. Now we go to the outfielders. Good to see everybody in the chat. I see Uncle Charlie and Peta and John, Gary, and hey Gary, tell me more about that SEC, man. Woo! They got dragged. Third year in a row. See Brian's in the chat, and I think you were telling me that you weren't worried about Indiana playing Alabama. Oof, that did not age well. All in good fun though. We had a lot of good fun last night. That was a hell of a ball game, and I always know I'm doing a pretty good job when someone comes in the chat that's not familiar with who I am and my fandom. And I saw someone say, "Is this guy a Miami fan? Because I think he's pulling for Miami." I'm like, dude, I'm the farthest thing from a Miami Hurricane fan, but I tried to give emphatics on for both sides. So we look forward to whatever tonight's game brings. I'm assuming Indiana will win and get to the championship game. And it'll be interesting to see if Miami actually has their fan base, because they're going to be playing at home, and their fans have never really come out. And we'll see if they actually show up since they're going to be in their own backyard. All right, let's go to the next topic. We're going to try to speed these up a little bit. We're going to go to the outfielders, and the outfielders are an interesting bunch because you always get the same names. And I did grab a couple of big names that you're familiar with, but you may not realize how good they really are in the whole grand scheme of it all. The first guy that we've got on the list is an interesting one because, and what I did is I went left field, center field, right field, and then we went to the next. Okay? So I went left field, right, center field, right field, and then we grabbed a couple of other outfielders that they didn't have to be a specific position. The best left fielder nobody ever talks about, and it's a little dumbfounding that he's not in the Hall of Fame. His name is Sherry McGee. It is the same spelling of my last name, but no relation that I'm familiar with. He played for Philadelphia in the early part of the 20th century, and Sherry McGee played long enough where he was the 4-time National League RBI leader from 1907, 1910, 1914, 1918. He is on the Philadelphia Phillies Wall of Fame. He was the NL batting champion in 1910. He was the World Series champion in 1919. And he did play for the Boston Braves from 1915 to 1917. So he is technically a Brave, but more known for his first 11 seasons with the Philadelphia Phillies. He just missed playing for the 1914 Miracle Braves. The Cincinnati Reds is where he finished off at from 1917 to 1919. And so he ends up a guy with 2,100 hits. But here's the thing that gets me when I look up these guys' numbers. And it's dumbfounding when you see a guy who's not in the Hall of Fame, but all the other guys on this list in the top 18 are in the Hall of Fame except for Pete Rose. I'm talking about left fielders. Every single one of them. Minnie Minoso, Joe Medwick, Zach Wheat. These are great names from days gone by. Willie Stargell, probably someone you're more familiar with. All those guys they rank higher than. He ranks higher than Ralph Kiner. And he is not in the Hall of Fame, and I think it's well overdue. I do remember him coming up on the Veterans Committee years ago and just missing it, just being short of it. And I was curious because of his name, et cetera, et cetera. So I had to go and go look him up, and then I saw that he was also a Brave for 3 seasons. So it's not like it was just a cup of coffee. So he was a Boston Brave. So there is that link to him where, if he goes in, you like to see another Brave get into the Hall of Fame. But it's ridiculous that all these guys he's got a higher WAR than, and he played in a dead ball era, and he's got a higher WAR than some of these other guys who played in the live ball era. So it's really strange that he has not been put in yet. He's a guy that nobody really talks about, but he ended up. So he was born in Pennsylvania in 1884, and he had a hard life growing up. I did some research on it, and basically came up in a mining town, taught himself how to play baseball, and away he goes. The rest is history. So he was always motivated by the fact he didn't want to go back and be a coal miner. But a guy that has been on the Wall of Fame for the Phillies for decades, and was looked upon at the time that he played, he was looked upon as the best left fielder in the game for about a 12, 13-year period. It's extremely strange that he's never been brought in. But some of these boobs that that draft these players, that vote on these players, they don't understand what they're looking at because they're trying to compare their overall numbers to someone else's overall numbers who played 50, 60 years later, and it wasn't the same game. So Sherry McGee is the first one on the list, that he's one of the greatest of all time that you've probably never heard of. The next one, this guy you should have heard of, but I don't think he gets his just due. He's one of the greatest center fielders to ever play the game. He played in the same era, by the way, as the left fielder of Sherry McGee, but he was a center fielder, and his name is Tris Speaker, but he was known as the Gray Eagle. And when they talk about the greatest center fielders of all time, you'll always hear them mention Willie Mays, Ty Cobb, Mickey Mantle. Nowadays, it's Mike Trout, Ken Griffey Jr., the great Joe DiMaggio, Duke Snider. If you're not familiar with Duke Snider, he's a guy I thought about, but I hope most of y'all know how great Duke Snider was. Duke Snider in the 1940s and into the 50s in the city of New York, where baseball really grew and became the national pastime that it is today. Duke Snider was the Brooklyn Dodgers guy. And if you were growing up in that era, you were either a Mickey Mantle guy, a Duke Snider guy, or a Willie Mays guy, and it really just depended on who was your team. Were you a Giant, a Dodger, or a Yankee fan? Carlos Beltran, who's going to get in the Hall of Fame this year, in fact, that vote comes up in a little over a week, he's up on this list. But these are the guys that you heard about during that time period. And the guy that kind of gets overlooked is the great Tris Speaker, mainly because he played from 1907 into 1928, but he played with the great Boston Americans / Red Sox team that ended up being the powerhouse of the first couple of decades of Major League Baseball in the World Series era, meaning from 1903 until 1920 when Babe Ruth went to New York, et cetera, et cetera. But Tris Speaker was the center fielder when Babe Ruth was slamming those home runs and pitching shutouts from the left side of the mound. Tris Speaker finished with a .345 batting average, still one of the highest batting averages of all time. 3,500 hits, 792 doubles. And he was a guy who they raved about his glove. Now, they didn't have the Gold Glove back then, but I can guarantee you if the Gold Glove existed, he is going to go out there and win Gold Glove after Gold Glove. They didn't bring the Gold Glove until well after he retired. So that was not even an option realistically. But Tris Speaker, the Gray Eagle, and they actually called his glove where triples go to die. That is my pick for center field. For right field, this is a guy that a lot of y'all grew up on, but I don't think until you lay out his total numbers that we realize how great he was. And I think one of the things he gets pushback on is because he was so vocal about himself. He liked to brag. That was a part of his charm, his personality. But he backed it up. And I'm talking about Mr. October. Reggie Jackson is one of the greatest right fielders to ever play the game. Finished with 563 home runs and did it the right way. 1,700 RBI. Almost 2,600 hits. And remember, he started with the Oakland Athletics in 1967 and played till 75. So he was there for the back-to-back World Series championships, right? He was a two-time World Series MVP in 73 and 77. He won the World Series 5 times, the 3 with Oakland from 72 to 74, and then back-to-back in 77 and 78 with the New York Yankees. And he was a 4-time American League home run leader from 73 to 82, won it 4 times. And he has his number retired in both the Athletics and the New York Yankees. And not to mention the fact, and this goes along with Bill Dickey, he was honored to be put into Monument Park, which is behind center field wall at Yankee Stadium. You have to be an all-timer to be at Monument Park. And I don't think that Reggie Jackson gets the acknowledgement that he should. And I think a lot of people don't realize how high he is up on a lot of these lists. I mean, 563 home runs. What's John saying? Beltran is getting in for a different. That's why I don't know what that meant, John. But I guess you're not wanting Beltran, and I mean Beltran's getting in. If you look at Beltran's numbers, they're just through the roof. I know he was involved in that whole scandal, but I don't think that's going to hurt his chances this time. I don't know if that's what you're referring to, because I think you might have mistyped something. Let me see here. The next guy up on the list, so we go from Reggie Jackson. Now, these are just 2 extra outfielders that I think we did a whole show on this guy, but I don't think that the overall numbers really reflect how damn good he was, because his career was cut short. We're talking about Shoeless Joe Jackson. Shoeless Joe Jackson, who, if he played out his entire career, now he finished with a lifetime batting average of .356. And before they started fiddling with all the numbers and whatnot, that was 3rd on the all-time list. .356 in the dead ball era, I mean, that is something. I can only imagine what that guy would have hit if he just would have played, we'll say 10, 15, 20 years later. He was a 1917 world champion, but it'll always be marred by the 1919 Black Sox scandal. And I get that point of it. but he still finished with a batting average of, not only did he have the 356 batting average, but even with all of the games that were taken away from him at the end of his career, he still has the 15th highest WAR in right field of all time. He's above Tony Gwynn, which shocked the hell out of me, because when I went to do the research for this, you just figured Tony Gwynn, with all the things that he did and he accomplished throughout his entire career, you would think that he would be much higher. Ichiro, that one doesn't shock you as much because he started his career in Japan. But then you start seeing other names like Dave Winfield and Vladdy and even Bobby Bonds and whatnot. To me, when you look at Shoeless Joe and what his numbers could have been if you'd not gotten banished, it's astounding where he is sitting on the all-time list. The next guy on the docket is Mel Ott. Mel Ott was New York Giants player from 1926 to 1947. You've probably heard his name because when they do the home run chases for a career, he always gets passed by somebody fairly, almost early into it because he finished with 511 home runs. But when they first start talking about, hey, so-and-so just passed so-and-so for the home run all-time lead, Mel Ott's one of the first names that pop up because they really start paying attention to that when you get to 500. The 1,860 RBI. The fact that he was with the Giants from 26 to 47. So he was the Giants. If you grew up as a Giants fan in New York City, we'll say you grew up in the 20s and you stayed through into the 1960s. There's a pretty darn good chance your two favorite players you ever saw were Mel Ott and then Willie Mays. But you're going to hear more about Willie Mays because he came around. By the time he came around, you had the television in everybody's home, et cetera, et cetera. So we have more video of what he did. But Mel Ott is an all-timer. Mel Ott was a 12-time All-Star. They did win the World Series in 1933. He was a 6-time NL home run champion, and he led the league in RBIs in 1934. So to me, Mel Ott was one of the best to ever do it. And they don't talk about him enough. Mel Ott is just unbelievably one of the best. And I don't know if we're ever going to see a guy of his stature, because he wasn't a big commanding guy. Like some of these guys that hit the big home runs back in the day, the Jimmy Foxes and whatnot, they were big guys. Mel Ott, you see the pictures of him. He's not a very menacing figure, but man, could he lay into the ball. He was from Louisiana, and he was known as Master Melvin. And Master Melvin was one of the best to ever do it, but we never talk about him. We start talk about the outfielders, a bunch of other names always come up, but Mel Ott should always be brought up. Now, my two utility guys, these are guys that could have easily been the starter on any of these positions, but I just wanted to add a couple of them because when I got to their names, I was like, man, they just don't talk about these guys like they should, right? They're guys that get overlooked. One of the first ones that came was Eddie Collins. Now, you'll know the name Eddie Collins even if you don't even know why you know the name. But Eddie Collins did play for the Chicago White Sox during that Black Sox scandal. He was not involved in the scandal, not accused of the scandal. There's some people have alluded that they thought he knew something about it. But regardless, he was with the Chicago White Sox from 1915 to 1926. Before that, he was with Connie Mack's great Philadelphia A's team, played all the way to 1914. Because of that, and we're talking about with the Philadelphia A's, and they were a dominant team back then. They won 3 World Series in 4 seasons, 1910, 1911, 1913. and could have won a couple more. In fact, it was one of the more miraculous things about the 1914 Miracle Braves is that that's who they knocked out. They knocked out what everyone looked upon as the unbeatable Philadelphia A's. But the World Series champion, he was a 6-time World Series champion. He was the American League MVP in 1914. They had just started that award a few years before that. He was the American League stolen base leader 4 times from 1910 to 1924. And remember, during that time period, he's going head-to-head steals in the American League with the great Ty Cobb. He is in the Philadelphia, the Athletics, and the Boston Red Sox Hall of Fame. And I don't think, because if you read up on, or you see in the movies on the White Sox, he's kind of mentioned in passing. The great Eddie Collins is one of the best players to ever do it, and they never talk about what he did and how well he did it. But he was primarily a second baseman, but he did play all over the infield throughout his career. But if you were going to put him somewhere, he would be playing second base. All-time WAR leader, Eddie Collins is only below Rogers Hornsby, and he's barely below him. It's insane. But you'll always hear people talk about the great second baseman. What are the first names that comes out of their mouth? It's Joe Morgan. It's Rod Carew, right? It's Jackie Robinson. The old school guys will always mention Roger Hornsby, but you never hear Eddie Collins. So he makes the list. And then the next guy on the list, and this is a guy that we've mentioned time to time, but it's always been in the context of the Cleveland Indians name because they were known as the Cleveland Naps, the great Nap LaHoy. So he played for the Cleveland Naps / Broncos. They were officially the Broncos, but everybody called them the Naps. From 1902 to 1914. He finishes his career the last 2 seasons with the great Philadelphia A's teams for Connie Mack in 15 and 16. Prior to that, he played for the Phillies and started his career from 1896 to 1900, and then started with the Athletics in 1901 and 1902. What made this man so good? First of all, Triple Crown winner in 1901. Second of all, 5-time AL batting champion. 4 consecutive from 1901 to 1904, and that was the most sought-after crown in all of individualized awards at that time because no one really valued the home run because not many people hit it. It was your true medal as a hitter was what was your batting average. That's why eventually I think it was about 5-6 years later, they actually started having competitions where some of the car companies were giving away free cars to the guy that won the batting crown. But he won the batting crown from 1901, 1902, 1903, 1904, and then again in 1910. He's a 3-time RBI leader, and he's in the Cleveland Indians, now Guardians Hall of Fame. But originally, they were the Cleveland Naps before they changed it to the Indians when he retired. The great Nap LaHoy. All right, we're going to finish this off with some pictures, then we'll get out of your hair. 7:15 by D.M. McGee, 2024. At 7:14, while enduring the hate, he carried the ghosts and stepped to the plate, echoing down from the great Yankee lore, the Bambino's shadow larger from days of before. Henry brushed back the pressure that loomed, threats from fanatics, knowing records were doomed. Into the box, and here comes the pitch. 7:15, it flipped like a switch. Fans escorted 44 round the bases. Hammer and Hank lit up their faces with smiles that unite as he wiped away tears. He hugged Mama tight for so many years. The hammer had climbed The ladder to the top. A sigh of relief. Briefly, time stopped. We recall and rewind the impossible dream. That night down in Georgia of 7:15. 7:15 by D.M. McGee, 2024. Okay, real quick, we'll run these off because I don't want to keep you up. I said I was going to get this done well before 7 o'clock, so I want to make sure we stay to that because I know the pregame starts for the college football game. By the way, thanks again for everyone who tuned in last night. We had our numbers far surpassed our expectations. Probably going to do a lot more football calls next off season. Didn't really get the kind of we didn't get the kind of viewership that last few years, other than the Army-Navy game that we got last night, and what was it, the Alabama-Indiana game, and then whatever game we did before that. So we're going to do a lot more of that. We're always on the fence about it, but I mainly do it just to keep the irons sharp because I don't like to go months and months without calling a game, and then also I did call basketball and football games before I got in doing this on baseball, and I just want to make sure that I don't forget because you do forget how to call a game. Anyways, back to what we're actually talking about tonight. The starting rotation. I won't go into deep dives on these guys because I do want to keep this shorter for y'all. But these are the starting pitchers, some of the greatest starting pitchers in the history of the game that I just don't think get talked about enough. We're also talking about the relief pitchers. We're going to do the relief pitchers really quick to start off, because I'd like to give more time to the starters. But two of the relief pitchers, and they're up there on the all-time list. But I'm telling you nowadays, if someone talks about the greatest relief pitcher of all time, they have one go-to answer. It's always the same, and it's always Mariano Rivera. And I get it. Incredible career. But I think people would be shocked to hear he does not have the highest WAR of all time. The highest WAR of all time from a relief pitcher, now granted he was a starter at times in his career, was Dennis Eckersley. And people just don't talk about him enough. Dennis Eckersley realistically became the new modern day version of what Rivera ended up perfecting, which was the closer, the guy that came in to slam the door, that you used maybe 50 times a season, but he only came in for one inning. Prior to that, a lot of your relief pitchers, even the Goose Gossages in the 70s, they were brought in for 2 innings plus. A lot of the times, the idea was to bring a guy in to slam the door, and then you wouldn't use him again till the end of the week. So you had so many starting pitchers that would go the distance. Well, when Eckersley came along and became an everyday closer, that began teams looking for that kind of closer. Now, he started it just before guys like Bruce Sutter and whatnot took off. But I do think he gets lost in the mix. Before Mariano Rivera, anybody would ask you, who's the best closer you've ever seen? I'm talking about growing up watching baseball in the 80s and 90s, and I'm talking about having these conversations in bars as a young kid in the 90s. The answer was always Dennis Eckersley. No one ever talks about it. You'll hear people talk more about Trevor Hoffman, even Goose Gossage. Maybe just because everybody likes Goose's mustache. But I'll tell you a number that's going to throw you for a loop. When I was looking at this and I was seeing the all-time WARs, so you see Mariano Rivera, he's number 2 below Eckersley. But once again, Eckersley did start for quite a bit of his career. But some of the names that will pop up in there, because Lee Smith ended up with a 28.9 WAR. So when you see these WAR numbers, you can't compare them to the everyday position players because they just don't get the same value to cross in their career. But they probably should. But you know who's in the top 25? And this one just threw me because he's still playing. Just signed with the Tigers. Kenley Jansen is number 24 all time of all the relievers to ever play the game. He is only a few notches below Raleigh Fingers. Raleigh Fingers, same situation, started off as a starter. The other guy that I just wanted to kind of circle because he's a guy that they talk about him that if he played today, the way they use pitchers today with just the one inning, most believe Hoyt Wilhelm would probably finish in some years with 75 saves because they believe they would use him that often. That often. And that just blows your mind, but it's because he was a knuckleball pitcher. Okay? And we all know knuckleball pitchers doesn't take a lot out of your arm because you're not throwing with all your gusto, right? But they're saying that if Hoyt Wilhelm, and you wonder if this will ever come about ever again where you get a knuckleballer as your closer. But they said that he could actually control that knuckleball, and that was unlike any other knuckleballer we'd ever seen. Maybe the closest thing would be Phil Niekro, but even Niekro would talk about just the precision that Hoyt Wilhelm had. I never saw Hoyt Wilhelm play. He was born in 1922. He played his entire career pretty much before I ever started watching baseball. But here's a little side note. When Roger Maris was chasing Babe Ruth for the all-time home run record in 1961, in the famous game, if you've ever seen the movie 61, they actually lay it out, but in the famous game where if he would have hit that home run that night, he would have broken the record without any stupid asterisk, right? And the wind was blowing in Baltimore. It was kind of a rainy type night. So it was already kind of working against Maris. The guy they brought in to close the game was Hoyt Wilhelm because his manager knew that there was no way in hell anybody was hitting a home run against Hoyt Wilhelm with the way the wind and the rain was blowing in and you're throwing knuckleballs. I mean, when you hit a knuckleball out of the park, the batter does the majority of it. When you hit a 99-mile-an-hour fastball out of the park, a lot of it has to do with the speed off the bat from the ball coming at you that hard. So that's a little side note, but Hoyt Wilhelm is one of the greatest to ever do it. He only finished with 228 saves, but a lot of that had to do with save was not a stat back then when he first started. So that when they went back to calculate it, they weren't bringing him in for, okay, he's up by 3, starting the 9th inning, let's go. No, he was just brought in, hey, we got a lead, go out there and protect it. So Hoyt Wilhelm is one of the ones that I think is one of the most overlooked and underrated of all time. The greatest manager that they never talk about is the great Harry Wright. And why would a Braves fan want to know who he is? The great Harry Wright began with the Cincinnati Red Stockings. And he was there when the Red Stockings folded. And quite a few of the players and manager, Harry Wright, they moved from Cincinnati to Boston to form this thing called the Boston Red Stockings that has become this thing that we call the Boston Braves, Milwaukee Braves, and now Atlanta Braves. So he was the main catalyst of why we have the Atlanta Braves today. And he won 4 NA and 2 NL World Championships. So our first 6 World Championships, 6, was with the great Harry Wright, and he's looked upon as one of the fathers of baseball. 6 World Championships. And I guarantee you his name never comes up. If you're sitting around the Battery drinking a beer and they go, who's the best we ever had? They're all going to go Bobby Cox, and they don't even know who the hell Harry Wright is. Harry Wright, what do the kids like to say? Put some respect on his name. Put some respect on Harry Wright's name. All right, the pitchers, real quick, we'll get into these. These are just flabbergasting numbers that you may not realize how good these guys were. Number 1, with a bullet, he's probably your ace on this staff, is the great Grover Cleveland Alexander. You've probably heard his name, probably because he just has a long name. It's kind of memorable. Grover Cleveland Alexander played in Philadelphia from 1911 to 1917, then went to the Cubs for 9 years, went to the Cardinals for 4, and the Philadelphia Phillies is where he finished for his last year of his career. But Grover Cleveland Alexander, 3-time pitching Triple Crown, 1915, 16, and 20. 6-time NL win leader, which was, no one even pays attention to that anymore. But back in those days, much like the batting average with hitters, the wins is all anybody cared about. They didn't care about your whip. They didn't care about your. They really didn't care much about your ERA. It was how many wins could a guy go out there and get, because they were pitching from the first inning until the game ended. He was the 4-time NL ERA leader. That was 4 times in 5 seasons, from 1915 to 1920. 6-time NL strikeout leader, and he is in 3 different team Hall of Fames. He is in the Cardinals, the Phillies, and the Cubs Hall of Fame. He was born in Nebraska. He died in Nebraska. But in between, he gave 373 wins in Major League Baseball. And in an era where you didn't strike out, he had almost 2,200 strikeouts, 2198. Those were astonishing numbers back then, because a strikeout was looked upon as very embarrassing back in his day. If you struck out, it didn't matter what you did. If you came out and you said, "Hey, I got a base hit, I went 1 for 4," yeah, but you struck out. You gave it a bat away. That was always looked upon back in Grover Cleveland Alexander's day. It's horrific. So when guys got 2 strikes, you don't see it much anymore. When guys got 2 strikes, they would choke up on the bat so they could make contact, put the ball in play. The next guy on the list, I'm gonna save the best for last, because he is technically an Atlanta Brave. The next guy on the list, Eddie Plank. Eddie Plank, from 1901 to 1914, played for the Philadelphia Athletics. He was a part of that machine, those Connie Mack Philadelphia Athletics. He also played for the St. Louis Browns for 3 years, and he was a 3-time world champion. He had 300 wins, 326 all time. He had an ERA of 2.35, and he finished with 2,246 strikeouts. He is one of the best that no one ever talks about, and it's a damn shame. Eddie Plank, one of the best to ever do it. Oh, by the way, lifetime ERA of 2.35. Can you imagine anyone doing that today? No way. Another guy, and I think people get him confused. I know I did when I was a kid. Grover Cleveland Alexander and Lefty Grover, not the same person. When I was a kid, I would get confused. I'll go, what? Wait, what? This guy played everywhere. Philadelphia A's from 1925 to 1933. By the way, the great Connie Mack was still there. He managed and owned the Philadelphia A's for 50 years. He played for the Boston Red Sox from 1934 to 1941. 6-time All-Star. Won the World Series in 29 and 30. That was the second part of the... So when Connie Mack ran the A's, he infamously, once he figured out that he could make as much money losing as he could winning, he would do what the Marlins were known for in the 90s, build together a big championship team, then sell off all the parts and start it all over again. So this was the second part of his... So he had the dominant team from the mid-1900s all the way till about 1914, where he did a big sell-off. He rebuilt the A's, and by the late 1920s, he was at it again, and the great Lefty Grove was a part of that. He finished with exactly 300 wins, but something's interesting about this. He would have won many more games, but he was blocked in the minor leagues because his minor league team did not want to sell him until he was at the highest until the highest bidder came through. So most people believe that he lost 3, maybe even 4 years of his career, the prime of his career, being stuck in the minor leagues, and there wasn't a lot you could do about it back then. So most people believe that if he came up when they thought he would come up, when he should have come up, Lefty Grove probably finishes with somewhere around 350 plus wins, if not well north of that. But a very conservative guess would be 350. If you're going to give him the benefit of the doubt, we're talking closer to 400. 2-time World Series champion, 6-time All-Star, AL wins leader 4 times, 9-time AL ERA leader. Man, I'll tell you what, if you're playing fantasy baseball back in the 1920s, you better go get Lefty Grove. 7-time AL strikeout leader. Unbelievable player that no one ever talks about. And the last 2 guys, first one I want to bring up, the great Carl Hubbell. You've probably heard the name. You probably don't know why he's looked upon as great as he is. But I'll give you this. The great Carl Hubbell, first of all, he played for the Giants his entire career from 28 to 43, 1928 to 1943. Carl Hubbell, a 9-time All-Star. He won the World Series in 1933. 2-time NL MVP, 3-time NL wins leader, and a 3-time MLB ERA leader. He led the league in strikeouts in 37. He pitched a no-hitter in 1929. But that's not what everybody remembers Carl Hubbell for. If you wonder why everybody talks about Carl Hubbell, it's because of the 1934 Major League Baseball All-Star Game at the Polo Grounds. One of the most memorable moments of all time, and it's unfortunately it wasn't televised. There was no TV back then. In succession, Carl Hubbell struck out 5 future Hall of Famers in a row. 5 in a row. Oh, okay. Well, who did he strike out? In a row, in this order: Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Jimmy Foxx, Al Simmons, and Joe Cronin. All 5 of them head to the Hall of Fame. All were basically in the prime of his life. Babe Ruth was kind of on the back end, but he was still Babe Ruth. He struck out all 5 in succession. And remember, once again, in 1934, it was an absolute embarrassment to get struck out, especially in an All-Star game. He struck out 5 in a row. That is something. In 1984, by the way, at the All-Star game in San Francisco where the Giants held it, though he played in New York, they actually had him throw out the first pitch. And you know what he did for his first pitch? He threw out his famous screwball. That's what he was known for. That was his strikeout pitch. A lot of people back then called it the fadeaway, but the screwball that would go away, it would fade away from the lefties and dive in on the righties. That's the great Carl Hubbell. And the last one on the list, I know I've probably mentioned him before, but I don't think he gets enough love. He played for the Boston Bean Eaters, Boston Braves, Boston Red Stockings, that whole organization. From 1890 to 1901, 1890 to 1901, 12 seasons. He finished up with St. Louis and then Philly to finish his career, but he was known as a Boston man. 362 wins was Kid Nichols. Kid Nichols had a lifetime ERA under 3 at 2.96. In an era where you didn't strike anybody out, if the guys in the teens in the early part of the 20th century were in the dead ball era, Kid Nichols pitched in the dead ball era. Nobody struck out back then. He finished with 1,881 strikeouts. And Kid Nichols is one of the greatest pitchers that nobody ever talks about, and he is a Brave through and through. Was born in Madison, Wisconsin in 1869 and still looked upon as one of the best to ever do it, but no one ever talks about him because he played so early. All right, I appreciate the kind words, everybody. If you got any questions, fire them into the chat. If not, we're going to get out of here. I know a lot of y'all might have bounced out. Want to go ahead and get out of here before the football starts. And if not, y'all have a great night, and we will see you on the other side. The next broadcast we're going to be doing is Monday Night Football. We're doing the Steelers, which I know Pete is a huge Steelers fan. The Steelers versus the Houston Texans. And that'll start at 8 o'clock on Monday night. We should have a lot of fun with that. And then we're going to be doing the national title game. We'll find out tonight who the team on the other side to face Miami will be. And as far as Braves countries today, we talked about this a little bit on the last broadcast. Unless they make a big signing, the next one will be the Thursday before Braves Fest, which is January. Is that the 29th? Yeah, January 29th. I've got some appointments that I've got set up for the next couple of Thursdays when I would normally be doing the show. So we're going to do it the Thursday before Braves Fest, which is January 29th. That's the next planned Braves show. We are doing the football shows on Thursday morning the next couple of weeks. And then when we get back, we're pretty much there, baby. When we come back from Braves Fest, that week is the Caribbean series, and we're going to bring you as much as I can. They haven't announced the television schedule yet for it, but as soon as I get it, I'm going to bring it to you because nobody's bringing it. Nobody's doing the Caribbean series in English, so we're going to try to do it. And right after the Caribbean series finishes, then it's going to be spring training. And we do have a spring training preview show the day before it all begins. So as soon as I know when the Braves' first preseason game that we can do that will be televised is going to come on, I will put it as a post. So if you're not following the posts on YouTube, I do that for all the y'all who don't necessarily jump on Facebook or what's the other one, X a lot. So any kind of programming notes, we'll either put the card up, but as soon as I know that what the first spring training is, I'm hoping that they televise the Tampa Bay Rays game on the 21st of February. But I just know what it's been the last few years. Atlanta and Tampa have been really, really slacking on putting cameras up in the first part of the season. But I do feel pretty confident that following week, one of those will have it. Y'all have a great night. And Peter says, go Steelers. We'll see you on Monday. Have a great weekend.
Goodbye, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go. We're back tomorrow with another show. Well, unless we're fired, we'll talk to you then. Goodbye, sweetheart. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Guys and gals, it's time to go. We'll see you on the next show.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
It's closing time, y'all. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Have a great one. On your way out, please like and subscribe. And don't forget to tip your favorite bartender. We'll see you. I'm Mac McGee, signing off for Braves Country Radio.